Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and today we're going to be talking in depth about a business that many of you may not fully understand, but it has deep linkages with Pakistan's economy, everything from construction and real estate development to the textile sector. And what it has been doing over the last few years has been truly exciting. Not only is it a dominant player in the domestic market, but it has started exporting its products and at a competitive price and has growth ambitions to further grow Pakistan's exports. I'm talking about Engro Polymer and Chemicals Limited, and I have with me the honor of having with me Jahangir Piracha Saab, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the business. He has previously served as CEO of Engro Vopak Terminal Limited, as well as Engro Elengy Limited as well. They've turned around the business on the polymer side over the last few years, and Piracha Saab has been at the forefront of that change. So first of all, Jahangir Piracha Saab, thank you so much for joining us today on Pakistonomy and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Uzair. It's an honor to come on to your podcast. Looking forward to having a nice conversation today with you.
So I want to begin with sort of the turnaround that's happened at the business, right? Obviously, it's grown tremendously through the pandemic. We can jump into that a bit as well. But there was a period of time a few years ago where the business needed to be revived. Tell us a bit about how you and your team went about doing that and where do things stand today?
So Uzair, this business has been part of Engro's portfolio for a number of years, and I would say more than 20 years. And we've been growing this business organically, So if you understand any commodity, I think scale is what makes the big difference for you. You've got to have a world scale plant or world scale manufacturing, business, which gives you the right set of cost structure where you can be competitive in market. Alhamdulillah, Pakistan's economy and the PVC demand has been growing at a steady rate of about 6%. We started with a very, very small plant of about 100,000 tons. We expanded it to 200,000 tons. A world scale plant would be about 400,000 tons. So that's the sort of size you've got to have if you want to be in this commodity. We have, alhamdulillah, reached now 300,000 tons, which means that all our cost structures are getting that economies of scale. And that's one benefit which we are getting. And our ambition is to take it further to 400,000, where everything sort of really becomes world scale and your cost structures are very much aligned with what the world produces, And that's where you can really compete and, you could be a very profitable business through all cycles of commodity, commodities are cyclic, So you design the size and cost structure for the worst sort of period of the curve when the commodities are at the lower end. So business was feeling the pain when we were at the lower end of the commodity cycle because we didn't have the business scale and our cost obviously were quite high for the scale size of the plant. Now I think we have just brought in a new capacity. And as life would have it, we are at the top of the commodity cycle also. So it's good times to bring in a big capacity when the business is extensively leveraged also because you've taken enough debt to finance your expansion. So it's a good time to bring in a new capacity. We have done that, and our plan is to further increase it to 400,000. That's where we will really be at the right size. So that's been the aim over the last few years of the business to get to that scale where we become a globally competitive business.
So, which is awesome news. I think one of the things that when I talk to folks about the economy and get feedback from listeners is that there's this view that Pakistan's economy, generally speaking, can't compete globally. And in fact, your business is evidence that no, it is possible to be globally competitive. It is possible to even use that as an advantage to export. Tell us a bit about what the keys to success were in terms of what Pakistan has to offer. How did you grow the business, and what were some of the lessons learned as you decided to, add the capacity and get to a place where the business can now say, we can stand on our feet and compete with the best in the world?
So one generic, advantage you have in Pakistan is there's a very large domestic market. You have 220 million people. You are not a country which is totally dependent on exporting. you have a very big, large domestic market, which gives you that steady, sort of market where you can supply at all times, And one of the key things which we have been focused in is obviously to grow the demand of the product also. So business development effort has been going on. I would say 20 years back, 90% of our product was going into only pipes, which is the most sort of simplistic use of any plastic, and it's a low value product, So over the years, effort has been going on to, introduce this plastic into more and more products, be it windows. I can see your windows; they are PVC right now. I mean,
Yes.
be it some of the foam board applications where you're replacing now chipboard and marine board in the kitchens. So effort is to introduce new products which are actually being used or produced extensively in the Western world, and our effort is indirect, sort of encouraging local entrepreneurs to make that investment, because Engro doesn't want to get into that side of the business. You don't want to really compete with your customers. So we have been encouraging our customers to look at new products. We have taken them to some of these K Fair in Germany, and we've taken them to China, where we made the linkages with the producers of different plastics and also equipment suppliers. So there's a lot of facilitation which has happened, which has at times given us spurts of growth which are upwards of 7-8% even. Traditionally, the industry has grown at about 6%, and you want to accelerate, you go to 8-9% type of growth. So some of these newer applications are seeing double-digit growth now, which is extremely encouraging, because as I said, our objective is to get to that golden number of a world scale, producer. And that can only happen if our customers become more users of our product and they expand and they do well. So that's the kind of linkage we have. It's a B2B model. So we are not selling directly to customers or consumers. We're selling it to our customers, who are then selling it to the consumers. So that's one effort. And then looking at benchmarking with the technology licenses for getting the best and most efficient technologies in place. Obviously, you have your fixed cash cost in a chemical business, which is your salaries, some of the rentals and others. And then you have the variable cost, which is energy, your raw material. And the efficiency on the variable cost actually is a very big, makes you really very, very competitive. And there a lot of intervention has been, because we have old plants, we have new plants. So we have tried to really upgrade ourselves so that our variable cost also is reducing, or we become as efficient as possible. And now I think the next phase will be, investing in technology, bringing AI concept, artificial intelligence, digitization of the plants. Those are the next sort of frontier which we will be stepping into, which will again, make your assets or our assets extremely efficient. That's the mantra which we are really working on. Efficiency and scale. And that's what the business is doing, and market development, where newer products get, sort of introduced and used by our consumers. So this is the kind of three-pronged approach which we've followed all these last 5-6 years. And I think that's the same strategy will go on in next 5 to 6 years also, inshallah.
I think the product and market development side is super interesting, right? Because I live here in the US, and you pointed out my windows. In fact, the floor in my basement is made out of PVC. It's vinyl, and it's synthetic wood. It feels and touches like wood, but it isn't. And it's cheaper. It's more efficient. In fact, it's coming and growing up in Karachi. I remember looking at this basement floor, and it was like, it's actually better for flooding. In case there's a big storm that comes in, it's easier to clean up and replace. From your point of view, I was looking at the data, and Pakistan is a laggard on a per capita basis of consumption, even compared to India. Forget about countries like Korea and the United States. Is it just an awareness issue in terms of where the PVC market is in terms of its development, or are there other barriers in terms of customer choice, or just things that people are like, oh, this is plastic, I don't want it? What is the big barrier to market development here?
No, so one, obviously you talked about, it's the knowledge that products of this type are available in the market. So one of our key area of focus last year was to at least create a showroom type of an environment, which we have done in Defense Karachi. That's our first one, where you go and we have these 4 floors where we have all the applications of PVC shown. And it was a very big surprise that a lot of people don't actually understand. I mean, if you live in Western, in the United States or Europe, you are actually, using lots of plastic in construction and lots of products you use. In Pakistan, people were not even aware that those products exist here. So one was that, and obviously over the years, people have realized that some of the, let's say the wood, let's take a comparison with wood, which is basically in the windows. So we were more expensive at one point in time. Wood has become now more expensive. So we are not still the cheapest. So aluminum is probably, windows are still the cheapest sort of available choices for people, but we are right in the middle now. And the kind of advantages you have, better sealing, better insulation with PVC, very little maintenance. So those are the kind of things which, when you tell people on a life cycle, actually, installing something like this, you might spend a little bit more money, but on a life cycle, I think you're still sort of better off. So those are the kind of concepts which we are telling people now. And I think that's really growing the market. So one is that. Second part is, obviously in Pakistan, we have a little bit of a dilemma that there's little standardization, So if you are putting up a house in the United States, window would have a specific size. You don't have choices of, a few choices. But in Pakistan, I mean, there's no standard. You can put a window of any size. Now, how do you mass produce for a market where every window is a customized window for you? So those are some of the things which we are struggling still with. Other thing is that, enforcement of the standards. If you're producing a pipe, the quality assurance part which producers are supposed to follow, a lot of people don't follow that. That gives a bad name to the product in the end. If you have, there's a filler and there's a resin, 90% should be resin. If somebody is putting 30% filler, then obviously the durability of that product is not going to be great. So some of those interventions have also been done by us. We have worked very actively now with Pakistan, Standards Institute, Quality and Standards Institute, and made sure that there are enough standards around and people to start following it up. And we do testing of the products also. We provide a lot of, customer value, that what you're buying from a customer of ours is of a right standard. And we test it for them also at times to make sure that, I would say sub-quality product is available, substandard products. But then those brands should be known to people that if you're buying something which is substandard, you're paying less, it's not going to last as long as it would.
The other thing that I wanted to touch upon as part of this, obviously it's set for growth and your ambition is to grow the domestic market. One thing that people, think about when they hear about plastic materials and its use is, okay, what happens in terms of sustainability? What happens in terms of, recycling or getting rid of the plastic? And again, talking about standards, enforcement about such things is also a problem in a country like Pakistan, where people illegally dump things, etc. How is Engro and your team thinking about, as along with the growth that comes in terms of you selling your products, how do you then deal with the recycling issue that may come years down the road, and on what's the thinking on that front?
I think good question, Uzair. So let me give you a little bit of a view on the PVC. Single use is about 7%. So it's a very small size, which is primarily wrappings and some packaging where it goes. Most of the PVC is going into the buildings as windows, pipes, cables. All the entire insulation is PVC actually. So a lot of this is actually going into buildings for next 50 years, let's say 40, 50 years. And when they dismantle the buildings, a lot of this is recyclable. So a lot of PVC or plastics, which are generally used in construction type of places, is easily recyclable. It's not spread. You're dismantling a building, you're actually going to reuse. So that is big advantage. Now, is it happening in a formal sector? Very little, to be honest. There is enough. There is a lot of recycling in Pakistan. Right from our childhood, we have seen, even the bottles were recycled. You had that kabadi wala coming and picking up all that, and you pick up bottles, you pick up some of the other stuff you had at your house, and they were recycling. Now that bit is happening in PVC also. What we are trying to do is make it more formalized, and it starts with collection. Because municipal waste is where you need to really start collecting, segregation. So we are currently working on 4 localities in Pakistan to do a pilot and really understand what is and all types of plastics. You would not, sort of zero only on PVC, but all types of plastics, and really understand what is sort of a medium-sized Pakistani town of, let's say, 6,000 to 7,000 people. What is the plastic they are producing, or they're actually discarding every day in their garbage. Once you have the numbers, then you obviously go back and do a feasibility of a recycling plant, and then finding. I think once you start formalize it a little bit. I think my own view is that there is enough demand for recycled products in Pakistan because of the cost advantage also. So you don't want to really grow your business beyond 400,000 tons. If I start recycling 20% of what I'm producing today, that's the growth. We are in a region in Alhamdulillah, we are in that part of the world where the demand is so low that you're starting with a very low base. And if demand increases, some of that should be serviced by a recycled product. So you don't have to put a new plant every year, just to meet the demand. Let's say if our per capita goes to 2 kgs per capita, 2 kgs of, let's say, PVC, you don't need to put a new plant. You have your plant, and then you start bringing in the recycled product, and it could be us or one of our partners, which is actually recycling, and that product can then be used. And the recycled products can you pick up a pipe, you just shred it, and then you can remelt it and make pipes again with it. So there are lots of it's an easily recyclable product, and I feel this is a very important part of our agenda going forward. We are targeting right now about 7%. So our short-term goal is 7%, which is single use, to be honest. So we've not sort of gone and made a target that we'll go and do 50%. Starting with 7%, and then eventually, obviously, we'll increase it as a thing happens. We are also looking at putting up a circular plastics institute in one of the universities. So discussions are very advanced, and you'll probably hear about it in a week's time that we are signing an MOU. So we need people doing research, and thought leadership should come, and advocacy at the government level, especially on policy. There's no institute on sustainability or really on circular plastics in Pakistan. We've taken membership of Global Plastics Association, and again bringing the best knowledge from outside to Pakistan. Because when you start with a low base, I think if you put best practices in place earlier on, we're starting with a low base of plastic usage. Imagine if we were like at 10 kgs, per person. We'll be swimming in plastic right now as a country. So you're starting with a low. If you can put the right sort of set of best practices in, we will have it in a very, very manageable manner, our growth of plastic usage. And plastic usage, big problem is the collection part. It is the plastic is not the problem. It's how you actually dispose of plastic after usage. That's the one which we need to really address.
Yeah, and I think from a country like Pakistan's point of view, right, you mentioned wood, that people prefer using wood and all sorts of things, including windows. We don't have a lot of forest cover, right? And the last thing we need to do is chop down more trees to use a material, when in fact we have the option of technologies using plastics, which then can be recycled, right? And I think there is a policy gap there as well in terms of even tracking what new construction is going up with what types of materials, so that as they go up and as these buildings get older, we have a sense of, okay, this is how much demand there will be in terms of recycling. And that can make the feasibility analysis, as you mentioned, right, far easier to say, okay, this many new buildings are using this much PVC. We actually have the demand, and it makes sense to set up a recycling unit or two across the country. From an export perspective, I noticed doing my research that you have started exporting PVC as well. What has that experience been like? And as you look at, the 400,000 ton mark, what type of mix are you looking to achieve in terms of domestic demand versus trying to export the product that you're making in the country?
So I think, Vikas, Uzair, this is a good question. Again, as I said, when you put up a plant, we have got a 300,000 ton plant. Pakistan's demand right now is about 250, 260,000 tons. So we have excess capacity, and that capacity, as opportunity is arising, we are exporting. We are mainly exporting to East Africa, Turkey, South Africa. So we went and exported wherever we could, and we got good rates for it also. But that's not the real value add export, I would say. Value add would be somebody putting up a plant here which can produce this stone plastic composite tile you talked about, which is installed in your basement, which looks like wood but is not wood. And the markets for these products is North America and Europe. And there is a big opportunity because a lot of diversification or over dependence on China is happening in the world. So that is opening up lots of opportunities for countries like Pakistan. Because if I export this tile versus just the resin, the value add cost and the foreign exchange you can earn with 1 kg of this resin is going to be phenomenally more than what I would get if I just sell it as resin. And that's the direction we are working with a few international brands right now. We've started discussions. They have shown interest to come to Pakistan, not primarily. Now, this is a very big breakthrough if we are able to do, because I think we're talking at least to 2 groups right now, international groups, which want to do this, produce PVC products in Pakistan and export. They feel Pakistan's GDP and per capita income is not of the size where if they put up a world scale plant, they will be able to sell everything in locally. So they said we'll sell some part of it locally, maybe 10, 12 to 20%. 80% should be export driven. And that will be, so the dollar you will earn from those exports are a lot more than, maybe 4 times of what if I just sell resin, or 3 times more money can be earned. And that's the direction which we would ideally want our, plastics to go out. I was telling somebody that Korea does not export plastic resin. They export it as an air conditioner. They export it as a car, or they export it as a refrigerator. So it's those value, or a mobile phone. So those value added products are the real ones where plastics earn you a lot more than just selling resin, which is the lowest sort of value added, zero value add product. In fact, it's a zero value add product. So that's the direction which we are working on. We feel also it's very important for a country of Pakistan's size, and with our, perpetual problem of current account, everybody knows about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. So it's important that we have a little bit of an export outlook now. We can't be just sort of servicing the local consumers. And those are the areas where companies like Engro Polymer can really play a pivotal role, because we have the size. We also can produce, give raw material to value adders who want to step into this space, and who can make products which can then be exported globally. And because we have the size, because the rest of the industry is so small scale, SE, the small and medium sized industry, getting them to, partner with international large companies at times not even possible. So when you give them a surety of supply of resin, and they can actually, and obviously everything else need to work when they do the feasibility. If that can be done in Pakistan, it would be a great thing. I mean, that's my dream, that if we can make value added plastic products in Pakistan and sell them. And those are really, you talked about both of them. I think there's the windows is one, where a lot of windows are going out to places like Home Depots and the tiles. And some of these other applications are also on some of the films which go on to the, as a replacement of wallpaper or paint. Some of those stuff is also being made. But I mean, the real markets are Western markets for those products, where people have affordability and understanding of those products. Pakistan will get there, but you'll never justify a large scale plant just to sort of service Pakistani market.
Yeah, I think you mentioned circular economy, right? That's the link in terms of the circular economy, is that Pakistan's market currently is not of the size. But if we can get value addition done at home that then gets exported, that leads to higher incomes, and that higher incomes then grows the market domestically as well for all sorts of things, including the materials you may be exporting right now. And I think the other exciting thing about this potential venture in Pakistan, I would say two more that strike me. One is that for years, the policy framework in Pakistan has been market-seeking investment coming in. And that has exacerbated the problem that you touched upon, current account deficits, et cetera. And if we can get export-seeking investment coming in, that's the way to solve that conundrum. And I think the second interesting thing about the flooring and the windows, et cetera, is that both in Europe and the United States, or North America writ large, given the sustainability programs they have, given the climate change adaptation programs that are funneling dollars into the real estate construction side of the economy, demand for these materials is only going to go up, especially if you can have better insulated materials that sort of, trap heat and cooling better. So that it is a growing segment, and it's exciting that Engro is trying to get going on the value addition side. On that question, though, from your point of view, and you've worked across so many industries in Pakistan, is there a policy linked barrier that can be, that the government can play a role in order to further accelerate this transition that's happening in terms of attracting the right type of export seeking investment into the country, particularly in your sector? Or do you think this is just at this point a more feasibility assessment and let's get the business going problem?
No, so I think Pakistan has the problem that it's one of the largest sort of, I think, top 20 economies and population which does not have a hydrocracker. So the basic building block of all plastic starts with a cracker, and we don't have a cracker in this country. When we started our journey, hardly anybody, very few, converters of the product are there. So when you put up a resin plant in a country, like an intermediate petrochemical plant in a country, then you actually kickstart very large segment of the economy. Lots of businesses downstream get started, and then obviously the usage of the product becomes good. As you reach world scale, you can then export those products, and you produce them very, very economically for your local market also. That hasn't happened, to be honest, in Pakistan. If you really look at it, Pakistan, anybody who has invested has always looked for a policy. So you had the automobile policy. This government has just brought in the mobile policy, where mobile manufacturing has started now. There is work going on the refinery policy right now, but the petrochemical policy, especially the intermediate petrochemical policy, does not exist today. So we are working right now with some of the other like-minded groups in Pakistan which have ambition in this space, and we are trying to work with the government to bring in a policy for petrochemicals. Now, and the idea is, as I said, we are not going to organically grow. So idea is that you get into those things where we have reached the scale to put up a world scale facility. Now, you don't want to start with a 50,000 car plant. If the world scale is a million cars a year, and that's where you really get the scale where you can produce them economically for the local market as well as export. That's the number. So we have reached in this country for multiple chemicals where world scale facilities can be put up. One is obviously the one which we are producing. We are destined to get to 400,000. We are already at 300,000. This is a small step. Inshallah, we will be there. Then there is polypropylene, which is extensively used in car manufacturing. Paint boxes you see, paint cans you see are all polypropylene. So there are lots of usage of that plastic also. That is about 500,000 tons right now, is what Pakistan has reached, and we are importing everything on that. So that's another one which Engro has announced, polypropylene plant, where we are saying that We want to put up a world-scale polypropylene plant in the country. Once that plant gets installed here, downstream industry obviously flourishes immediately. Because I mean, imagine, in today's, and we have really seen with COVID that how vulnerable the supply chains are. You can't be dependent on importing everything, and servicing the local economy. So the more in place capacities you have in the country, ideally makes downstream industry flourish. They don't have to keep inventory. It's convenience. We provide technical services also in improving the product quality, which they are doing. So this is what happened in the PVC. It will happen for other plastics. So our objective is first to get this in. The second objective, and which you talked about export, is how effectively are we able to operationalize our CPAC special economic zones, which government has announced. So 4 or 5 are supposed to be developed. There's one in NWFP, I think Rashakai. Then there's one near Faisalabad. There's one near Karachi, Dhabeji. I think there's one in Gwadar also. Now these are, when you go out to in the world, you find very, very well developed, industrial parks. Now in Pakistan, there are problems. If I want to set up something today, availability of land, utilities, electricity, all sorts of permits, I have to go all over the place. Now imagine if you are a foreign investor, why would you like to do that? In most of the countries, people fly in, they have these industrial parks or special economic zones, and it's a plug and play. So if we can really create these special economic zones, Faisalabad is very, very much ahead right now, and I think it's getting developed. And if they can create all these other 4 as effectively, I think you will have definitely people coming in, and they can then, buy resin from us and make products which they can export and sell in the local, market also. That bit is missing, to be honest. That plug and play approach, which you see in Vietnam, you see in Turkey, you see in Egypt, and I'm not even comparing ourselves anymore with, most developed countries like South Korea and Japan. So our competition, and we need to really follow now, or even Bangladesh to some extent, that plug and play facilitated approach for foreign investment to come in. And foreign investment should ideally come in Pakistan either to as an export driven market, export driven project, or as a replacement of import substitution projects. Those are the real important ones for us, with our current account issue, which you have seen. So other investments are great, but then the Pakistanis can also do those side of things. And I don't want a candy maker coming to Pakistan to make a candy when there are companies in Pakistan which can make candies. We need obviously high quality international companies coming in, either to to solve one of our pressing problems, which is current account deficit.
And I think the candy or fast moving consumer goods sort of segment, right? It's stuff that even entrepreneurial Pakistanis can set up the manufacturing plant. And you're right, you don't need that best in class, world class scale to be competitive, right? You can have a small brand that then grows and thrives. You mentioned CPEC and the SEZs there. That sort of makes me ask you the question, how do you see overall, sort of in the last couple of years, we've seen and heard from government policymakers about this geoeconomics pivot and the fact that Pakistan now wants to see its geographic location not as a source of extracting geopolitical rents, but more as this is a destination where you can come in, invest, and then trade with the rest of the world, whether it's into Central Asia and beyond. Iran and India, obviously, because of geopolitical reasons, are problematic. But then you have the sea, and you can basically touch upon, and sell your products to wherever in the world that you may want to. How do you see this sort of change of thinking that has emerged in Pakistan in terms of looking at things from an economic lens, which perhaps 10, 15 years ago was not there?
No, I think it's a good question. So there's a geopolitics involved in the CPAC, and I don't want to really make any comment on that. But what has CPAC given to Pakistan, and what problems has CPAC project solved for Pakistan? Let's start with those. So the bulk of the projects were power sector. We were having serious, blackouts in the country and brownouts, and requisite capacity had to be put in Pakistan, and that got installed. Now that could be coal. That was also a lot of LNG based power plants which came in that time period, and also we had the hydroelectric projects which are right now under execution. So a lot of these are part of the CPAC, sort of tail end projects, which are, I think, focused all on the hydroelectric. Then you needed infrastructure, highways, obviously. That was a critical need of the country. And I think some of these motorways which got developed between Sakkar and Multan and Lahore. And I think the last stretch is Hyderabad and Karachi if it's done. So literally you'll have like a world scale, beautiful roads right from Karachi all the way to, I would say, Swat and Fujairah. You have great highways. Roads make a big difference, and the last.
Sorry to interject on the road thing. I know somebody from Gilgit Baltistan, and we were once talking about the impact of this investment, and he was like, you can actually drive a truck in Gilgit Baltistan now and have your cup of tea on your dashboard, and it's not going to spill. That's how good the roads are.
Yeah, the roads have been absolutely great, and with that, obviously the tourism just boomed, the northern areas, local tourism. I mean, they were absolutely, my wife and I were planning a trip and there were no hotel rooms available, in the season. So, literally there was a boom going on because people could just, if you are sitting in Gujranwala in Faisalabad, maybe not from Karachi, you just put the family in the car and drive up, and that's what people did, and the entire place was full of tourists and a lot of, and these are the most deprived areas of Pakistan. So billions of rupees went into as tourism, spent in these areas in last few months only. And I think that's going to have a serious impact on the economy of that area. A lot of hotels are coming up there in that region. So CPAC, that was like the first phase. Infrastructure, primarily roads and power projects. Second bit, I think Gwadar port. Obviously, it's a deep sea port, which I tell a lot of people that Gwadar should be seen as a port which is which is a transshipment port, not as something. Why do we so much focus on the connectivity or rest of the world? Why can't Gwadar be a feeder port for Karachi? The big ships can come, and because it's a deep sea port, you bring everything to Gwadar and then put it on smaller ships and ship it to Karachi, because right now that transshipment is happening from Dubai or from Colombo. So even if you use Gwadar for transshipment of things to Karachi or oil, we are big oil importers. Imagine if you have large storages there, because Karachi ports are not as deep. So those super carriers can't come here. You can bring a super carrier to Gwadar and then put in small barges and start supplying things to, to Karachi, because we don't have a mindset, So Singapore does not have anything trucked in. They come in ships and they go out in ships. Gwadar is a great port in that context, that it can become an excellent transshipment port for two ports of Karachi, as well as Africa, India, Middle East. You don't have to go into the Persian Gulf. Actually, you're right at the point where ships can do a lot of transshipment from there, but we don't have that mindset in Pakistan. We don't look at ocean economy or blue economy, as they say. We look more sort of connectivity. We look at everything from a connectivity.
You almost read my mind on that, because I was talking to a government stakeholder who was in DC recently, and we were talking about Gwadar and Karachi in that sense. And the entire conversation was about how can we ship things by road into Central Asia. And somebody in the room who was from the shipping industry was like, you need to think exactly what you just said. Think about transshipment and think about the role you can play in the blue economy, where your location is not just north through land, but it is the entire ocean that comes southwards from your country.
Believe you me, Uzair, if you start transshipment of containers for only Karachi ports from Gwadar, it'll be worthwhile. And oil, because everything gets sort of converted from a big ship to a smaller one once they come to Karachi ports. So yeah, there is a lot of, but we don't think like that. Hopefully we start thinking like that. So that was Gwadar was one. The next phase of CPAC is all about these industrial parks, special economic zones. And that's a more difficult one because obviously there's no G2G, government to government contracts, private parties have to come. That's where Pakistan has to play a bigger role in facilitating that plug and play approach, which you find out in Chinese special economic zones or Vietnam, or maybe in Turkey also to some extent, or Egypt. These are the places where a lot of investment is going now. And they are creating those sort of environments where people get that thing that it's a one-stop solution when you go to a special economic zone. Now, if you're developing 5, what is stopping you if they're successful? Replicate another 5. That's where all that road connectivity which we have created, and these special economic zones, which means lots of small mini cities developing around them, jobs, and then the connectivity comes in. And the power supply, which we have now ample power supply. You need to have industry to use that ample power supply which you have created also. And industry is the one which pays also. I mean, you have a problem of recovery of your power bills from the people, especially where they don't have the affordability now also. These are good paying customers. I mean, if you have an industrial connection, I'm sure he's going to pay or she's going to pay you their bills. So those are the kind of things which we need to really focus on. And I think I'm hoping that CPAC, the second promise of CPAC now really gets delivered, because in the first one, there was a lot of onus on the Chinese part of the thing. Now our Chinese partners have done lots of work in the first phase. There's the second part where the Pakistanis have to do a lot more of work. I think that's the one where we need to really put our act together. And then it's open to everybody. I mean, if they have an industrial special economic zone, I think Chinese are not going to restrict, to make them economically viable, those special economic zones of the companies. They would want as many industrial, plants or factories there as possible, because that's how they will make money. And that's how the special economic zone companies will become viable entities, And I don't think so they're going to discriminate, that it's coming from West or it's coming from China or it's coming from East. I think they would want fully utilized. And I think Pakistan has a big stake in that.
I frequently remind folks who raise this point about China making things exclusive for Chinese in Pakistan. And I'm like, well, look at Chinese SECs. You have Tesla, you have Apple, you have everybody making things, you have GM. So why do you think that the Chinese won't follow the same approach in a third country where, in fact, in their own country, this has been the approach in terms of how the SECs are run? And so that's how we also, as Pakistani policymakers and business leaders and others, need to think about that this is an opportunity to, bootstrap what China has enabled and invite and work with the rest of the world as well, because the opportunity is huge. I'm mindful of time, so a couple of questions before we close this out. From your point of view, on the polymer side, again, where do you see the business in the next 4 to 5 years? Sort of the 400,000 thing we've talked about as well, but what is the ambition and aspiration there from the business? And finally, one of the questions I always ask my guests is, and audience loves that, is share a couple of books that have influenced you. It can be on any topic, but would love your thoughts on that as well.
Great, thank you. So so our ambition is kind of a little bit limited also, because as I said, we don't have a cracker in Pakistan. Ethylene being one of the key raw materials or building block for any plastic, you need to have a cracker in the country. Now, if the cracker happens, and that cracker can only happen if a large refinery, Abu Dhabi and Saudis were looking at this big refinery on the coast of Balochistan. If that project, so it's still being worked with Parco, if that happens and they eventually have a cracker with it, then I think our ambitions are unlimited, 1 million ton or 2 million tons. Because then I just need to, ship again, talking about blue economy, right from that port of hub or that area, a barge just bringing me ethylene. I don't need to lay a pipeline all across Karachi. It'll just be a barge bringing that ethylene every second day, and I can run a 1 million ton plant, So 400,000 beyond that, imported ethylene would be a very difficult thing for us to do. Maybe we get to 500,000 tons, but we really need a cracker in the country. And we are getting the scale, inshallah, that a cracker will come to Pakistan. Thailand has it, Indonesia, Vietnam is working on it, So you need that for next phase of growth in the plastics to happen. So hoping that that project comes through. Obviously, we need this deep conversion, large refinery, and that will have enough naphtha to eventually crack and get us ethylene building block. So that's the kind of next thing which we will wait for. That project is being sort of looked at very seriously. They have got a project team, companies are working on it, and inshallah that will happen. Second bit for us would be, how can our product goes into more value added products, as I said. You want to be really at the lowest end of producing, giving resin to people who make pipes, and sort of very simplistic things. So for me, a real success would be that I obviously procure some of my raw materials, for which foreign exchange is utilized. And then I produce a resin, and it's primarily used in domestic industry. Ideally, this should net off by people producing products, just like I talked about, which are then exported. So if you have a net of zero impact, you imported a raw material and exported something, you will finish with it, and that will be a very good place to be. I mean, it'll be great for our business, it'll be great for the country, and we feel that we are really part of a supply chain of an export-driven business for Pakistan. I mean, that's what my and Engro Polymer's clear ambition is, that you want to be part of an export-driven business supply chain. We are already, because in polymers, as a byproduct, we produce caustic soda. And caustic soda is extensively utilized by the textiles, and they are primarily, our customers are exporters. So we have an indirect, helping out the export industry of Pakistan on the side of the caustic side of our business, which is the chemical side of our business. So Engro Polymer has a polymer and a chemical side of the business. The chemical side is already part of the supply chain of export. The polymer need to be in that thing, and total net of impact of the business should be zero foreign exchange, sort of depletion for the country. So that's the big one for us. And you talked about books. So one of the books which has influenced me was by Ram Charan and Larry Bossidy, Execution. And I firmly believe that there's so much emphasis on vision and strategy, that you should have a vision and then you have a strategy. Somebody got to get their sleeves up and get into the execution part. And I firmly believe that we got to give equal importance. So there's so much of hype about strategy and vision, and those are extremely important. Those are 50,000 feet sort of things, You got to have somebody who can get into the trenches and do the real work, So Execution, and it's a great book, and it gave me great insights on why, the organizations survive, or how do you look at projects, and how much important execution is. So as somebody who's looking after an organization, I do look at, so I like great ideas, but I want to really implement those great ideas also. That's important. Just great ideas. Everybody has a great idea. How many of us were able to really execute those great ideas? Elon Musk thought of an electric car. He was able to execute in Tesla. So those are the kind of connecting the dots is important for me. Another book I think Jim Collins' book, which is Good to Great, and it talks a lot. So it's a book about how companies have survived for very long, but there is a chapter in it which is very important, which talks about the role of the CEO. So when I became a CEO, and it talks about, so there are, when you are young, you're looking at becoming a CEO, but would you ever be characterized or looked at as a successful CEO? So lots of CEOs fail. I mean, the failure rate is pretty high as a CEO also. And that's what I tell a lot of my young people who work with me, that are you really preparing yourself to be a successful CEO? Just becoming a CEO should not be an objective. and it talks in a great length what successful CEOs do. And it's not just about bottom line, it's people, it's about succession, it's about execution, it's about innovation, it's about ideas, and all of those things. And I don't know how successful I have been in that area, but at least it was an inspiration for me. And I think both have been quite an inspiration. Thank you.
I think the book Good to Great is the most recommended book on this podcast. I think at least 5 guests, if I remember correctly, have recommended it. I have gone through it as well. And you're absolutely right that it is about being a successful CEO, right? Like I look at, for example, Apple, like when Steve Jobs passed away, the big test for Apple began at that time. Did Jobs prepare his successor? And did he build an institution that could outlive his own physical existence in this world? And it did. Right. And that shows how, and he had to learn through mistakes, because he had made plenty of mistakes in the 80s and the 90s as well. So it is a very important read. And I think execution, you're on point. It eats strategy for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. As one of my former managers used to say, is like your roadmap can be really nice and shiny and slick. And if it can't be implemented, then it's, useless. So I'm glad you recommended that. Piracha Saab, thank you so much for taking out the time. For explaining to us Engro's business, his vision. I think this is exciting in the sense that an entire new industry can be birthed from the work that Engro and your team is doing. So kudos to you guys. Wish you all the best, and hopefully we will have, inshallah, a cracker in Pakistan and then hit the 1-2 million ton mark where Pakistan can be a global player in this global supply chain, which is only going to grow. And I think if we can have that type of execution in the country where next generation industries are set up from a look outwards to the world versus just the domestic market, that's the future for the country. So thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you, Uzair. Great interacting with you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.